Hi, class. Welcome to Adult Literacy in English Language. Today I'm going to read Chapter 14, Homeward of the Janitor's Son by Andrew Clements. It's been a while, but I'm back again to read. And you can find the information uh, for this book, the link, in the description box. Chapter 14, Homeward Bound. John Rankin's Chevy pickup was getting to be an antique. It was a '72, but if it hadn't been for the changes in styling, no one would have guessed. The original green paint was still in great shape, and underneath the denim seat covers, the vinyl seats weren't worn out at all. The old green Chevy didn't look like some trophy truck, the kind you see at a truck rally at the Holiday Inn on a Sunday afternoon. This was a real truck, a working truck. It was a tool, and John Rankin took good care of his tools. Climbing up onto the seat next to his dad, Jack knew the routine by heart. Pump the gas pedal 4 times, pull the choke lever out 2 clicks, count to 15, turn the key, and voom. The engine jumps to life. Worked every time, heart of summer or dead of winter. Jack was glad it was so late and almost dark, too. He didn't want any kids to see him riding with his dad, Jack thought. And that's another thing that's different. I never want a truck, and my dad has had this one forever. Easing out of the back lot onto Summer Street, his dad asked, "So how was the library?" Jack said, "Not so bad." Hmm. They waited for the light to change, and John Rankin sat stiffly, both hands on the steering wheel, his index fingers tapping along with the clicking turn signal. Jack wanted to know what his dad thought about him messing up that desk and why he hadn't even yelled at him. Now would be the perfect time to talk, maybe even say he was sorry. The light seemed to stay red forever. The silence felt uncomfortable, but Jack couldn't think of what to say. Then he remembered his talk with the librarian. Mrs. Stokely said it was hard to get the library moved last summer. His voice sounded too loud. His dad nodded and said, "Yup." He put the truck into first gear and pulled forward. Jack saw they weren't heading toward home. Instead of turning north onto Randall Street, they kept going west on Main Street and turned onto South Grand Boulevard. Jack pictured where they were, remembering how the town had looked from the top of the tower. Waiting at the next traffic light, John Rankin cleared his throat. Trying to sound casual, he said, "You get teased much about your dad being a janitor?" The question caught Jack by surprise, but he didn't show it. Nah, 1 or 2 kids have said stuff, but they're jerks. I don't pay any attention to it. That's good. Hate to think you're getting a raise on my account. His dad fell silent again. Jack could have opened up and said a lot more, but he stopped himself. Thinking about having a talk was easier than actually doing it. The light changed and the traffic eased ahead. Jack looked out at the store windows and the new car dealerships, and his dad kept focused on his driving. It was rush hour in Huntington. There were no real slowdowns, but the major streets were pretty full of 20 or 30 minutes every afternoon. After a mile or so, his dad pulled the truck up next to the curb in front of a big used car lot and shut off the engine. "I know I've told you that my dad was in the car business," pointing to the right, out the window by Jack, he said. "My dad used to on that lot back in the '50s. Honest Phil Rankin. He ran it right up to the day he died. That man could sell anything to anybody, and he made a good bit of money. It's his money that's going to put you and your sister through college before too long." He paused, both hands back on the steering wheel. Jack looked over at his dad's face, lit up by the string of bulbs that ran above the first row of cars. His eyes were open, but he wasn't really looking at anything. "I worked for my dad every Saturday morning from the time I was 12 until I left home to join the army. Hated it. I washed cars all year round, every Saturday, sometimes after school too. Hardly got paid at all. He used to bring a customer over to where I was washing. He'd come near on purpose and do his sales pitch, and when the deal was closed, he'd come find me. He waves a check or a stack of $50 bills at me. 'Did you hear how I did that?' he says. She See how I cut off every possible escape? I hope you listen good, Johnny boy, because someday this is going to be your place. You learn how to do this right, and it's like finding money on the sidewalk." I nodded and just kept on washing. I didn't like to think about that. John Rinkin paused and reaching for words. Jack could tell he was forcing himself to talk. His dad had never said this much to him at one time before, not even when they used to go fishing and sit together all day in the old red canoe. "And you know what really drove me crazy?" Jack shook his head, but immediately felt silly. His dad wasn't waiting for a response from him. He was years and years away. "I never had a car, no car, all during high school. Here it would have been so easy for my dad to set me up with an old car, just something to call my own, just a little independence. But that wasn't his way. Then one Saturday night, when I was a senior in high school, I swiped his office keys, went down to the lot, and drove off in a red Corvette. I was borrowing it just for the night." Jack hardly breathed, almost without meaning to. He slipped a hand into his right pocket and felt the two keys he had borrowed. As he described the Corvette, a little smile played at the corners of his dad's mouth. "That was quite a rig, let me tell you. First gear would run out to 50 miles an hour, way too much car for me. And wouldn't you know, I whacked that thing into a phone pole about a mile and a half from here. That fiberglass body just broke up into a million pieces." Jack gasped. "You mean you totaled a Corvette? Did you get hurt?" I was shaken up, and I had a cut on my chin, but I was mostly okay. The car was another story. That thing wasn't even good for parts. Bent the frame, cracked the engine block. Blue book price was $6,500. That's still a lot of money, but back then that was a whole lot of money. Jack asked, "What did your dad say?" "He came right over to the hospital, of course, but he didn't even ask if I was all right. First thing he says is, 'You got a big debt to pay off, mister, and you're going to pay it too. This summer, you're going to work for me full time. You got college plans, but till you dig out of this hole, you can forget all about 'em.' Well, I was never going to be some used car salesman, not even for a summer. And I told him so. 'You're just a loudmouth junk dealer in a cheap sport coat.' That's what I said to him. And I said I'd rather join the army than work for him. And come next morning, that's what I did, just to spite him. And I don't know what hurt him worse, calling him a junk dealer or me running off to the army." The flow of the story seemed to stop, but Jack felt there was more coming. He waited, and his dad began speaking again, his voice a little quieter. "You were about 2 years old when your grandpa died. At the wake, A man came up to me and said, "Your dad gave me a car one afternoon and he made me promise I'd never tell a soul. That car got me to and from my first job for 3 years. Your dad was quite a guy." I thought the man was nuts. He had to be thinking of someone else. But then the next day at the funeral, 3 other people came up and said almost the same thing. Well, your mom and me, we went through all my dad's papers, and sure enough, every year he gave away 1 or 2 cars, about 30 in all over the years. That's a lot of money. I mean, these weren't fancy cars, and old honest Phil figured out how to take some tax deductions, but still. And we found a box of letters from the people he'd helped out. It was like a whole part of himself he never let me see. And I thought, if he could give all these cars away to strangers, why couldn't he give just one to me? Took me a long time to figure that one out. Jack asked, "Was he just being stingy?" John Rankin shook his head. If he was stingy, then he wouldn't have given all those cars away. No, I think he just wanted me to learn that I had to make my own way. He loved me, and he didn't want me to be spoiled. Jack had been watching his dad's face as he told the story. He had that same feeling he got from one of those trick puzzles, the kind where you stare and a picture suddenly appears, and was just beginning to see a new image. Jack and his dad sat quietly. The traffic kept whizzing by, and 2 or 3 couples were walking around the lot, looking at the used cars. The salespeople circled like eagles. Then the traffic slowed to a crawl, and a guy driving a big blue Oldsmobile leaned on his horn right next to the pickup. Both Jack and John jumped in their seats and then laughed nervously. John put the truck in neutral and reached for the ignition. As he started the engine, he turned to look at Jack. "Just so you know, it for good and sure. I don't expect you'll ever be a janitor, Jackie. My life is my life, and yours is yours. I'm just glad that we get to run side by side for a few years, that's all." Checking the rearview mirror, he said now, "We'd better shoot on home or your mom will start calling the hospitals." The green pickup bucked a little in first gear as John Bracken edged out into the stream of traffic on South Grand Boulevard. At the next corner, he swung right, turned onto Oak Street, and headed north. During that short drive home, Jack realized 2 things. He didn't know how much about his dad, hardly anything, and he definitely wanted to know more. That's the end of chapter 14. I hope you enjoyed it. Please click like and subscribe to my channel and click the bell notification to be informed of future videos. See you next time, Lord willing.